Hi, I'm James Shillinglaw for Insider Travel Report, and I'm here with Marco Frank, who's the Trade and Partnerships Manager, North America for Visit Flanders. Now, why are we talking? Because Marco just put together an incredible trip for me. It was like Flanders in 4 days, which was it was amazing. I got a real sense of the country. I'd been to parts of it before, but never in such totality. And now I want to go back because there were definitely some things I missed. But I think I got the gist of what's going on in Flanders, and I'm eager to go back. But we're going to talk about that and a whole lot more here on Insider Travel Report. That's kind of my first question because for those of us out there who we know the difference, Flanders and Belgium.
Right.
What is the difference between Belgium and Flanders? I know there's a lot of differences in language, culture, and history,
Mhm.
really.
Exactly. So let me just lay it out in plain simple terms. So the country is Belgium. So if you compare it to the United States, that would be the United States.
Right.
And Flanders is a state within the country of Belgium. So the US is a big country. We got 50 states, and Belgium is much, much smaller. So depending on how you want to count, there's really only two or technically three states in the country of Belgium. As I said, the size of Belgium is approximately the size of Maryland. So no need to have 50 states in Belgium, just
So
the other
effectively, you
number.
have effectively two states. One is Flanders related, and one is Belgium related. And as I learned, I should have remembered this that if you start speaking French in parts of Flanders, you might as well speak English because the language is different. It is a form of Dutch, right? It's a
Yeah,
dialect, right?
it is exactly, it is Dutch. I mean, the difference between Flemish Dutch and Dutch Dutch is approximately the difference between American English and British English. It is still English, it's just a slightly different flavor. They can understand each other. It is Dutch. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Well, I started speaking French occasionally. I said, wait a minute, no, that's probably not. I might as well just speak English because that's, a lot did speak French as well, but uh,
Right.
I do not speak Dutch. That's my challenge.
Okay. I mean,
So,
officially, the whole country is trilingual. Belgium has officially three languages,
okay,
Dutch, French, and German.
okay.
And of course, pretty much everyone speaks English as well.
Yeah, well, that's what I found out. Now, we're gonna go through my trip, and then as I'm talking about it, as we're talking about it, we're gonna show you some of the images I took, and I did take a lot of photographs and some video, and there are going to be other videos that we're going to be doing interviews with some of the people I met, incredible guides, incredible heads of breweries because beer is a very big thing in Flanders and even other museums and things like that. So we're going to show you that later. But this is kind of a kind of a summary of the trip that I took. Now you started me off in Brussels, which is obviously the capital of really Belgium and of course both all the states. So it's Belgium and Flanders, right? Why,
Yeah,
why did
absolutely.
why did you want to focus start me there?
Well, it is the main entry point into the country, with Brussels Airport where all the international flights arrive. So it is the natural starting point to explore Flanders, to explore Belgium. And not only is it the capital of Belgium and Flanders, but it's also the capital of Europe, although technically speaking, Europe does not have a capital per se.
Right.
But it's just, a lot of the administration is in Brussels for the European Union. And you find a very rich history in Brussels. Brussels has over 80 museums,
Yeah.
uh, starting from the fine arts to modern arts to science museums, you name it. There's a lot of different museums. So it's a great starting point to explore the city. And you had the pleasure of visiting the Museum of Fine Arts.
Well, that's it. And that was when although I got to tell you, you didn't start me off with that. You started me off with Belgium Beer World, which was
Exactly.
interesting. It's in I think it's in what the building, it's an older building with I think was it used to be a bank? I can't
No,
remember.
it used to be actually the Brussels Stock Exchange,
Oh, and now it's
but
the Brussels Beer Exchange. Got it.
it's exactly, and it's a great museum to learn the foundation of Belgian beer. So if you're relatively new to Belgian beer, if you want the great foundation before you dive into the brewery visits out in the countryside or in other cities, Belgian Beer World, in the former stock exchange of Brussels is a fantastic start.
Yeah, and then also I was actually arriving right during the Christmas markets, and they were pretty spectacular. And I also got to see an incredible light show in the main squares that were just there that were really, it was amazing. And then you took me to actually a beer establishment, Moder Lambic,
Yes.
where I had a light meal and a little bit of beer.
Right. The lambic, very traditional style in the Brussels area, south of Brussels, natural fermented beer. So for those of us who know a little bit about beer and beer brewing, we know that, to kickstart the fermentation, the brewer adds yeast to start this process. But those lambic beers, they do not add yeast, but let them sit out in the open,
Mhm.
and the natural yeasty air south of Brussels will actually kickstart the fermentation process. So that makes them for some very interesting lambic and goose beer. So it's a very typical Brussels beer style.
No, it was a nice way to start that first day. And I should mention I was also in a pretty nice hotel, centrally located too, right? You put me where was it? You put me in?
It was the Dominican.
The Dominican, which
Yes.
was and yes, when we were going up in the elevators, there was like Gregorian chants in the elevators, which was interesting. But it is
Yeah.
a really great location. It's very central to everything.
Yes, yes, and I mean there is some meaning to the name. It's like a former site many centuries ago of a Dominican cloister, a
Okay.
monastery site. So there is some tradition to the name, and it's a fantastic hotel that is right in the heart of Brussels. So from there, you only are a few steps away from the beer museum, the Grote Markt, the main square where you can see Brussels City Hall. The markets, the light shows that he mentioned. By the way, light shows is something that Flanders in Belgium is very big. So
Mhm.
they always like to illuminate the cities at night so you can see the beautiful facades, the
Yeah.
nightscape. The city of Ghent has also a light festival that happens every 3 years. I've done it now twice, and you find amazing light installations throughout the city when you walk it. So these are all open air public installations. You just spend an evening walking through the city. Really an amazing job they're doing with light.
No, and really enjoyed those the light shows that I did see. And then of course the second day I was there, I checked out of the hotel, but I left my luggage and proceeded over to the Royal Museum of Fine Arts and History, which has a focus on Flemish art. And I had a marvelous, I got to tell you, it was one of the best guided tours. And I'm usually kind of a little bit hesitant when I go in museums to have a guided tour, but the woman who guided me around was amazing. And she just we were focused on the Flemish, so we started with the Flemish primitives and
Uh,
went away all the way up to all the Bruegels and all the
mhm.
other artists that are actually Flemish, right?
Yeah, 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 absolutely. I mean, personally, I think, a great guide can really make or break your experience. And I'm glad to hear that you had an amazing guide. You know, I highly recommend it, when you go to a museum that you book a guide so the guide can actually put some context.
Yeah.
They can explain the painting, the museum, what's the main purpose, because every museum has a little bit of a different focus. But the Museum of Fine Arts in Brussels has a great Flemish primitive collections, and it's really like those painters that refined and kickstarted the painting with oil. They really refined
Yeah,
that
and
technique
yeah,
and,
she
and
showed me
pioneered
that.
that.
She showed me that the difference. And you have to understand that we always think of the Dutch masters, but there were also Flemish masters, right?
Right. I mean, geographically speaking, at that time, everything was quote unquote just the low countries. By low countries, meaning like geographically low, close to the coast, so no high elevation, like in the southern part of the Holy Roman Empire of German nations, which was this loose conglomerate of all those independent duchies and kingdoms. So the low countries, historically have, always belonged together. Of course, now it's modern day the Netherlands and modern day Belgium, but it's like culturally, traditionally over the centuries, in North America, those painters are just known as the Dutch masters.
Mm.
But because, we are the Flemish tourist office, we're Visit Flanders, we're just trying to put a little bit forward our name as well.
Oh,
And
you
that's why
do
we
in
call
this
it the Flemish
museum. You do
masters.
in this museum, yeah. Yeah. So it was a great visit, a great education for me, and it was not too oppressive. She didn't try to over explain everything. But anyway, so I got through there, and then I was hungry, of course, because yeah, after visiting a museum for a couple hours, you get a little hungry. And then had brunch at a restaurant called Frank, which I said, wait a minute, you're Marco Frank, and this is Frank. Are you sending me to your family's restaurant, right?
Yeah, I wish I was related to them, then I would always get amazing free food and I will indulge in that free food. But unfortunately, no connection, no relatives. So no, it just happens to be the same name. And I'm glad you enjoyed the lunch there.
It was a wonderful brunch. It was perfect. And then I went and I took a train to
Mhm.
Bruges. And actually, I got to tell you, the train service in Belgium and Flanders is amazing. Really works like clockwork. I grew up in Switzerland, so I got a little bit of an idea what trains should be scheduled at, and they were all efficient. I had to take a few trains being all around, but this was great. So I got to Bruges, and it is this wonderful medieval town that's and of course, the movie I always associate, and you've probably heard it to death, although I got a sense that not everybody that wasn't top of mind when I was in Bruges, but there's a movie called In Bruges.
In Bruges, yeah.
That's a marvelous travelogue. It doesn't end well. We'll leave it to the folks out there to go watch it on Netflix. But the whole thing is that it's really a travelogue of Bruges, and that's what I was doing. And I stayed in a really beautiful hotel, Duke's Palace,
Mhm.
which is indeed a palace. And then I walked around Bruges. It's a UNESCO medieval center. It really, and I really kind of just took in the sights. I saw the famous tower, which is not a cathedral.
Mhm.
It's a gorgeous tower, and it is in the center square. And then that night, I had a wonderful meal. It was more of a French meal at Assiette Blanche,
Mhm.
and it's not too far from the main square. So that was a perfect introduction to Bruges.
I'm glad you pointed out number one, the mode of transportation. So yes, within Belgium, within Flanders, it's really easy to travel by train. I mean, for a North American audience, where we have a train network that leaves a little bit to be desired. The
Mm.
U.S. doesn't really have a magnificent train network. Let's just be honest.
Not like in Europe. No.
Right. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, no value judgment here. But, the train service in Europe is just at a much higher frequency. I mean, in terms of frequency, not in terms of service quality, but in terms of frequency, I always like to compare it to the New York City subway.
Got it. Yeah.
You miss the A train, no problem. Wait another 5, 10 minutes, there will be another train. Same here. You missed your train to Bruges, no worries, there will be another train in 10 minutes. So you can just, get on any train. Trains runs all the time, frequently, no issue whatsoever. And, with the destination being so small, so I mentioned before that Belgium is about the size of Maryland. And
Yeah.
then we just talk about Flanders. Flanders is about the size of Connecticut. So
Right.
again, not very big. And then once you get to Bruges, you're really in this, historic UNESCO World Heritage City, with those magnificent downtown area buildings. And the tower that you talked about, that's the Belfry. That's right at the market square. So it is a medieval watchtower. It served various purposes, for the fire guards, the night guards, to make sure that, of course, there's no fire that break out, and if there is a fire, they can alarm the population right away. And you also have to remember that in the Middle Ages, unlike what you see nowadays, where everything is built out of stone, at least in the early Middle Ages, 90% of the buildings were actually wood buildings.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So the fire was always a latent hazard. And of course, people had to have a fire. They had to cook at home. There was, of course, no natural gas or electric, cooking. This is all medieval times. They had to heat the houses with fire. So fire was always a latent fire hazard. So it was important to have that watchtower. It also served as a purpose of, guarding the city because you actually could see the surroundings.
Oh, yeah.
Or
And
any,
it was a walled city as well. So
yeah.
you can see that.
So from the belfry, you could see like are the enemies, approaching or not. So it had a great dual purpose.
Well, the next day, I actually spent more time in Bruges, and actually, you set me up with a tour with a buddy of yours named Tom Peters, who is
Mhm.
of Visit Flanders, and he's also a guide there. And he showed me all around Bruges, the main square, of course, the tower, which we keep talking about, as well as all the guild houses. There is a cathedral and other historic sites. And the one thing that I always remember, and I remember as a child when I went to Bruges, is the canals. And there's a lot of canals. It's a very it's really connected by canals, and we're gonna actually have a separate video with Tom on my little 1 day visit to Bruges around there. So we'll look for that after this one. But yeah, it was a great tour, and I got to compliment you for setting me up with that. That was great.
I'm glad you liked it. I mean, the canals is a must-see experience for the first-time visitor. It's a great way to see the city. And I mean, of course, now the canals are quote unquote tourist attractions,
Yeah,
but they do serve or served in the Middle Ages a very important trade route because, that's how goods were transported.
sure.
So across all of the Low Countries, present-day Holland, present-day Belgium, Flanders, you do find a lot of canals because it was an easy way to ship product. And it's like nowadays, still a lot of shipping occurs, commercial
Right.
shipping. But of course, in the city now, it's purely for a tourist attraction. There's no, commercial freight anymore of those on those canals.
But you can take tours of the canals on a boat, and that I
Right.
think I remember doing that. I didn't do that this time, but I think next time I want to do that. And Bruges itself is actually very close to the sea, which I had forgotten about it. There
Yeah.
is a port, that's not too far away. So,
Yeah, technically, the city of Bruges also includes the city of Zeebrugge.
mhm.
That is actually one city, and so it does extend all the way to the coast.
Well, then Tom finally dropped me off at the Halve Main Brewery, which is I think Half Moon.
Yes.
A brewery where it's been a brewery in existence for decades, I believe, if not several hundred years. And I met Anne, who is now runs the brewery with her brother. And boy, she took me on a kind of wild tour of the entire brewery. We walked up and down ladders. I don't know if that's the public tour, but it got me going. And it was interesting to hear her explanation. And of course, it is a family affair. It's a family-owned brewery. And then we had lunch, and they gave me a wonderful lunch there. And yes, there was a nice a bit of beer involved. So here we are
Mhm.
back to beer again. And
Right.
that was it really was. And we're going to have a separate interview with Ann about that as well, because it is a marvelous thing to do while you're in Bruges.
This is actually a very good point you're bringing up here, that it is a family brewery, because people always think maybe of Belgium, oh, there's Stella Artois and Stella and the big beer conglomerate, which is now AB InBev, and they brew and own 500 different brands,
Yeah.
from Budweiser to Stella to Newcastle Brown Ale to even Corona. They got their fingers in every single beer in the world almost. That's what it feels like. But apart from the big conglomerates, there are still, the small scales, mid-sized family brewers in Belgium. And they really, carry forward a tradition that has evolved over centuries in beer brewing and beer technology. So it's a very important sector, the family brewers. Another important point I want to point out about the Havemann Brewery is that a few years ago, they launched a crowdfunding campaign
Okay.
to build a beer pipeline that goes from the
Oh, I
brewery
almost forgot about that.
out to the bottling
Yeah,
plant,
yeah,
because
yeah,
they couldn't
and you
always get
can you
in.
can see that the beginnings of a pipeline. They're very proud of that, and
Yes.
people think of oil pipelines and gas pipelines, but boy, you have maybe the only beer pipeline, I think.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So for Belgium's beer pipelines are very important. And it's like the way they did it was also very interesting. There was a crowdfunding campaign, so everybody could invest in that with whatever, 500 euro, 1,000 euro. and your compensation is in beer for your rest of the life that
Very
you
good.
live. So depending on your investment level, you might get a six pack every month or so, or depending, it's like it depends on the investment level. And then the last point I wanted to point out is the one of the owners, so Anne, it's like it's a family brewery, but one of the family members is really into sports, into running marathons.
Oh, wow.
And he, of course, likes the beer as well, but drinking beers and running marathons is not a good combination. So he came up with an alcohol-free version of his favorite beer, the Bruges Zot, or the Bruges Zot Sport, as it's now called, the sport beer.
Yeah.
And that also really in Belgium kickstarted a trend that you see nowadays across the beer world,
Yeah.
that the alcohol-free beers are the number one growing category in beer. And the Bruges Zot Sport is actually, a very good alcohol-free beer. And so no guilt when you run a marathon and then you want to hydrate with an alcohol-free Bruges Zot beer.
Yeah, I believe actually Anne had an alcohol-free beer, but she gave me the alcohol one. So
Okay.
we'll see. I still and actually that may have been the reason why I kind of the tour was going long and I was supposed to go to a wonderful museum, the Gronage Museum.
Groningen Museum, yes.
I didn't get to that one. It's a reason to go back, but I did end up having going back to my hotel, which is great, and then I went to a wonderful kind of hip restaurant, Onslow, which is really a relatively new restaurant that is.
Hmm.
I was walking in the back the back canals, I should say, of Bruges, and I'm saying, did Marco steer me wrong? Is there really going to be a rest? It's all residential, and there was no real stores, and suddenly out of the darkness is this wonderful little warm restaurant, and I ate at the bar. It was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unusual that you just walk in the middle of an area. You think, oh my God, this is all residential. What could I possibly find here? And then you just turn a corner and there is this, nice little corner pub, or there's this nice little restaurant there in the middle of quote unquote nowhere. And then you think, like, how can this be? But this is just the way the city works.
Yeah.
You find hidden treasures everywhere.
Yeah, and it was wonderful, a different kind of option, very quiet and really lovely, and they gave me some wonderful service. Now the next day, okay, it's time to leave Bruges, unfortunately. And that's the first part of our tour of Flanders, visiting Brussels and Bruges. Stay tuned for part two when we'll visit Ypres and Ghent.